Two, one. Good afternoon, and welcome back to part two of our session on the misperceptions of cannabis. Now, in our last episode, we anchored the conversation in the physical vessel, as you know, exploring the deep medical recovery and wellness benefits of cannabis. But anybody who's looked at the sector knows that a powerful medicine cannot reach the people without a bulletproof commercial engine behind it. And as anybody who's followed me long enough also knows, we need to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. So, in line with that, today we're putting on our entrepreneurial hats. We're stepping out of the treatment room and straight into the boardroom. To guide us through the real world economics of this industry, I'm joined today by Eben Jansen, a top tier business consultant specializing in scaling cannabis startups and the driving force behind Green Gold. Eben, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. So, Eben, let's get straight to brass tacks here. There is a massive misconception among aspiring entrepreneurs that launching a cannabis brand or dispensary is just like opening any other retail store, but with a much cooler product, let's be honest. But in reality, we know that the regulatory terrain, especially here in South Africa, is a completely different beast. So when you're advising a brand new startup, what is kind of the single biggest regulatory blind spot or misconception that entrepreneurs entering the room with regarding compliance and licensing in the South African context are just not aware of?
Well, I think everyone is looking for a shortcut when it comes to creating value out of
Mm,
cannabis. And there simply isn't a shortcut. Compliance is a thing that I think you have to build at the center of your business model. And that said, compliance in South Africa is often a moving target. The regulatory framework, the regulatory framework isn't always very clear.
mm,
It makes it very difficult, I think, for the little guy to get into the market, as they have to go toe to toe against some very big entities, very big businesses, settled businesses, who often just smack you out the way with a checkbook. I mean, that's the nature or the state of the game in South Africa,
mm,
as it were. Uh, for me, I see a lot of unethical business practice happening within cannabis. I see a lot of dodgy lawyers who are selling the hopes of licensing and legal frameworks to some of my clients. And yeah, if there's maybe the one thing, the one nugget that I can maybe kick this off with you, Stefan, is that don't buy a franchise. Don't pay a franchise. If you want to start in cannabis, don't buy a franchise. I know, and what I've seen from people who've invested in some of the biggest names in cannabis, and I'm not going to name them specifically, but some of the biggest names in cannabis have made a business model out of selling franchising
mm,
to some of my clients, but to people who have a little bit of money. Maybe it's their pension, maybe it's
mm,
some inheritance that they feel, well, let me invest it in this business. There's certainly a big return of investment, and maybe if I buy or if I invest in a legal entity like a franchise, that I could maybe short circuit this whole regulatory framework. I would advise people not to do that. It's better to try and build your business brick by brick from the ground up. And I'm talking specifically in the compliance space. What people don't realize is that, you can build a farm if you like, and you can start a licensing or compliance process right from the beginning of it. And you can already be in production without having the final license, as long as your process is lodged with SAPRA and that you follow the compliance that they require. People have lost a lot of money in South Africa uh, trying to invest in franchises with unscrupulous businesses who are using cannabis to drive revenue. Now, a lot of people don't understand the ins and outs, nitty gritty of cannabis per se, and they think, oh, if I go with this a name, I'm going to be very happy. What a lot of these investors have found is that, yeah, the sort of, the product line isn't there, the consistency of delivery isn't there.
mm,
Some of them, in the end of it, even the licensing isn't 100% there. So, yeah, my one nugget I'd like to leave with people is start your compliance process from the ground up and build your business from the ground up and start small. I would advise against people trying to short circuit and shortcut it by going the investment route or the franchise route, because a lot of people have lost a lot of money and are now sitting with three, four shops. They don't have the supply, they don't have the margins, they're simply not sustainable, and they're very, very frustrated with their franchisees.
Now, it's so interesting that you should bring that up, because that was kind of going to be my next question. When we talk about the commercial flywheel, where most founders tend to stumble, most people want a brand that is recognizable, especially if they are legacy informal operators wanting to move into the more legal frameworks that we're discussing here today. They're wanting something that does stand out, and they think that a franchise is going to give them that. And you're saying, no, that's actually quite the opposite. It's not what happens. And it can be more of a headache than they might be thinking about. So you've obviously worked a lot with startups. I don't know, from Respite that we had on part one of the show. You've worked with her in terms of setting up her dispensary. When it comes to customer experience, how do you advise a dispensary to move away from the old cliche head shop vibe and really build a sophisticated, high trust retail brand that captures not just audience attention, but captures a piece of the market?
Cannabis, like all other businesses in the world right now, has one fundamental problem, and that is that everyone is doing everything. If you go to FMB, they're selling airtime now. Everyone is doing everything. So, so you have to understand what the key differentiators are. And
Mm,
I've kind of whittled it down with my clients to one specific thing, and that is your story. Your story is going to be your differentiator, and your story has to be backed up by a quality product that is sourced ethically, in a sort of value chain that creates value for your customers. And the end user, they want gummies that taste good. And have the right psychotropic and medical effect.
mm.
They want flour that has been flushed properly and burns properly and tastes good and has the right sort of terpene levels and all those sorts of beautiful things. So for me, that's the kind of long and the short of it is make sure that you have a key differentiator in your stable if you want to start it, and that's your story. And a story isn't always a global story. It's not always a national story. It's very often a local story. And cannabis
Mm.
is very much a local story. It's a community story. It's a story of healing our communities. It's a story of engaging our communities in and understanding what modern medicine is and what is what is possible with this miracle plant that we have.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, in line with that, then, I mean, you're talking about, what the market really is looking for. What would you say are the creative levers from now a strategic marketing perspective that a local brand can lean into? Because you mentioned there, trying to be everything to everyone is not going to work. Not everybody has a global story. Not everybody has a national story. Most people have a local story. So, what are the
Correct.
levers that people can really lean into to build organic traction and scale their customer base um, quickly, efficiently, but also, and we know this in a lot of startups, scaling too fast, too quickly brings its own massive headaches if you're not ready for it. So, scaling at a rate that actually is achievable and manageable for the owner of that dispensary.
The Respite is a very good example of exactly that. Respite is a brand that has gone exactly that route. It hasn't tried to go out and be a national player immediately. It's kind of etched itself into a local community. It's built loyalty within that local community and a clientele within that community based on products that are best of breed, if you like, and not just products that are best of breed because they're globally known brands, products that are ethically sourced and well made. I think that's one of the key the key fundamental problems that cannabis has now is, everyone is buying the same products from the same suppliers and trying to turn it around and make a buck out of it.
Mm,
Of course, as a smaller business, you're not going to you're not going to have the national ad campaigns. You're not going to be on the billboards. You're not going to have those kind of things. So you have to kind of fight the war of the flea, if you like, and understand that you're a small operator and that you are coming into a business. Uh, but the world is moving at a rate of knots. So the key things for small business is still optimization. It's for nominal fees, for smaller fees, you can get a lot more eyeballs, you can get a lot more interactions with your content, with what you do, by simply optimizing with the right social media partners, if you like, with the right online partners, if you like, making sure that you optimize your brand firstly in your local area and then kind of building it out to national. If you have the back end to really scale, and not everyone has the back end to scale, and that's where you need to make a decision
mm,
about what you are. In the case of Respite, they've decided not to go that route of trying to scale and try and make the big bucks immediately. Instead, they've gone the route of making sure they have the tastiest gummies, for instance, making sure that they make the best fudge, making sure that they have the best flour at the best prices for their community, because not everyone can afford the 200 Rand pre rolls that we see flying around, the 350 Rand a
mm.
gram flour that we see in the cities, for instance. So you have to source stuff that's going to serve your local community, and you build your brand out of there, and you build loyalty out of there, because, cannabis in the end is medicine. And people have to treat it as such. Yes, it has a recreational use, and I'd like to not call it recreational use, because that's the wrong connotation. I like to talk about adult use, because
Mm,
as adults. We use a variety of products, whether it is an antifungal foot cream, or whether it's a painkiller, whatever. It's
right.
your prerogative to use that as an adult, and cannabis in all of its forms should simply be seen as that. So for me, adult use is a key factor with regards to that.
That is very, very, very true. And I know respite quite well. And it's interesting that you brought up a lot of the aspects around their branding, because when they opened up in their small town, what I found so interesting was their prices were slightly more than some of the other dispensaries that had popped up, but they leaned into that, and the market segment that they've managed to capture, because of the quality that they were providing, is completely different to what the other dispensaries have on offer. So it's almost as though,
Yeah.
yes, there's multiple dispensaries, but they're not servicing the same market simultaneously. They're servicing very specific niches of that. But obviously, with those kind of market segmentations comes certain risks, and we have to be brutally honest about that as well. We know that cash flow, supply chain predictability, operational bottlenecks, all that stuff that management consultants love to bang on about, those can kill a company long before regulatory issues ever can.
Yeah.
So, if we had to do a quick reality check on the risk landscape here, what would you say in a unique market like cannabis, right?
Mhm.
What would you say is keeping consistent, high quality, lab tested products on the shelves? How difficult is that? And what structural advice would you give to excuse the pun, budding entrepreneur or startup wanting to ensure operational continuity there?
Yes, supply chain is going to be your key. Is going to be the key to your success. Yes, you got to have a good strategy. Your content has to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You have to service the right community, if you like. I think that if you're going to be a startup, or be a small business or entrepreneur to start out in the business, you really have to serve a smaller community. In the case of Respite, that's what they've done on the sort of south coast, and they've done really well with regards to that. However, monopolies are real in South African
Mm,
business, and cannabis is no different. Keeping the product away from the smaller operators is what some of the bigger farms have been
yeah.
doing. they supply only a few marquee names, if you like, and you can go have a look at it. So again, it's a very monopolistic it's a very monopolistic a sector that we have. The monopolies, they still drive the sort of supply chain, if you like. So for the smaller operators, yeah, make sure that you have those right relationships in place, but also understand that these days you need to think about manufacturing. You need to think about running your own test kitchen with next to your shop. If you're going to be a small operator, if you want to be just a dispensary that yeah, just driven by profit. Yeah, you can buy the generics from, again, I'm not going to name the businesses. You can buy the generics from all over, and you're probably going to have a margin, but you're not going to have that loyalty. Because
Mm,
I think what a lot of people have learned is that the gummies all start to look and taste the same. The drinks start to all look and taste the same, and yeah, it doesn't really serve the sort of market needs, if you like. Um, I would say, find a way to build the right relationships with ethical service providers within
mm,
the sector, and that in itself is going to be a very difficult one. In the case of Respite, it's a few years in the making now, and their test kitchen is up and running. They make their own gummies. I think it's the tastiest gummies around.
I
I
can
think
confirm that.
I think it's very clever in the way that they package it, in the way that they've broken it down. You don't get these 100, 200 milligram gummies that just knock you out for half a day or knock you out for a day even.
Mm,
It's more about a medicinal understanding of the product, and how do you get your clientele to engage with that product in a meaningful way like that. Uh, for me, yes, if there is a recreational element to it, but again, I'll be straight. It's about adult use,
yep.
and it's about medicinal use. And as adults, I'm not going to talk about the medicinal benefits of cannabis. I think anyone who's engaging with it should know what that is by now, and whatever condition you have, there's enough media available for you to be able to read up on it and be able to yeah, get the right information that you need. I simply think from a business point of view, it's very difficult to come with your, one of the big operators in South Africa is charging 850,000 Rand for a franchise. Now, a good friend of mine, he's bought he's now got three shops, and the kind of product that he's selling is very unhappy with that. The consistency, the supply chain is a mess.
Mm,
His business is at risk, and he's forced to pay this inordinate amount of a franchisee fee that's really driving him out of business. And that's the key risk, I think, for anyone who's trying to come into the business, is don't go into cannabis thinking that you can buy a franchise and it's going to be like a Nando's, for instance. Suddenly you're going to have 3 million Rand turnover because of this brand. There simply isn't a cannabis brand that has that pull, franchise that has that pull. Anyone who's going to charge you 850,000 Rand for a franchise is dealing, is doing devil deals with you, and is simply there to relieve you of your money. Um, I think
couldn't agree more.
there's a much better way for people to enter the market, to enter the sector, and to do so. Yeah, I mean, I'm not punting my own business. People can engage with me, and I can help them if they like. But
No,
for
actually,
me,
I'm so glad you said that because I want to punch your business right now, specifically because this leads into my next question. Because a lot of people have cash, like your friend who wanted to buy up and start in the
yeah,
cannabis industry, said, bought from a franchise. But I know a lot more people who are interested in investing in, but they don't want to do the day-to-day running of a store. They don't
correct.
want to have the headaches and all of that. But they do see the upside. I mean, I met someone who was just passing through town. She happens to own three stores herself, self-started, self-owned, etc. And we spoke about a few investment deals, and she said, nope, that's absolute rubbish. I'm not touching that. I make
Mm.
currently, I think she said, 500% per month ROI on my business, which is a phenomenal return on investment, right? That is just that's stellar. That's unheard of in any other market.
Unheard of. Unheard of in cannabis.
Yeah, well, she seems to have a, I suppose she controls the supply chain, and she did mention a few little tips and tricks
Yeah.
that she has. But for an investor looking to back a cannabis venture, they're not looking to buy a franchise. They're not looking to start something up themselves. They're maybe watching this show and they're hearing about like respite, for instance, and they're saying, you know
Yeah.
what? I can maybe expand that a little bit. I can put my capital in there instead of something that's only going to give me 10 or 12% per annum. I'll put it into a
Yeah.
cannabis venture and maybe make 50, 100% per annum, which is, still
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal. What would you say
Yeah.
are the KPIs, the green flags that they should be looking at before deploying capital into the space?
Yeah, you first look at look at what's happened from the top down.
Mm,
From the top down, I'm talking about listed cannabis health businesses, what has happened to them at the top and where they are now, and where that is sort of where that is sort of hanging. I wouldn't take good money and put it into any of these businesses to open franchises. I
mm,
simply wouldn't do. I think that's going to cause you a lot of headaches, and there's simply no recourse. There's simply no recourse for you once you've handed your hard-earned money over. There's simply
right.
no recourse. You're at the mercy of these unscrupulous businesses.
Mm,
Uh, there's a lot of other sort of investments you can make in the sector. Um, you know, they're drinks companies, for instance. There's a Green Lion who has an existing a catalog and an existing clients who supply more than 200 cannabis stores already around the country with a variety of drinks. And, in the case of Green Lion, they're looking to scale their business a little bit now. They're looking to go nationwide now. They've built a very strong business model in the Western Cape with their drinks. I think they can go toe to toe pretty much with anyone in the sort of drink space. So, I would look at those sorts of. But if I want to invest purely as an investor in a business, I would look at those sorts of investors, those sort of investments. I would look at because there's an existing track record, there's an existing financials, and you can kind of you have the backing of 200 stores that already exist and already interacting. So there's already a model. They would then say, okay, we want to go national. Maybe we need X amount to go into the next province. And that's the kind of thing I think that, investors should be looking at instead of, yeah, wanting to run a shop because supply chain issues is a major issue for shops. Consistency of the quality of your product is a major issue for shops, and then the headache of managing your front of house is the other problem. I work with a variety of stores. You've got people working in the stores who are selling their own product in your store, and so forth and so forth. So that's a real issue that a lot of investors will have to kind of face. And
yeah.
yeah, I think if you're going to invest, if you have some money to invest, I would look at existing brands in the cannabis space. In this case, and I don't want to punt respite all the time, but a business like that they've built their own products now. They've got their own product range. The quality is really good. You don't want to open a store, but you can invest in this business, backing them to make it over the next 2 to 3 years into a nationwide brand, because now they're going to have a content model that's going to come and sit on top of on top of a really good product model, and out of that we also developing a kind of online system that deals with issues like supply, issues with like stock, issues like the buying in of stock and so forth. And we try to connect the stores with I don't want to call them farms, but with suppliers, etc.,
Mm,
directly to kind of cut out all this middleman nonsense that we have. But we simply have that middleman nonsense in South Africa because the regulatory framework is so vague and it's so poorly policed. It's more a case of being, yeah, yeah, policed in every town. It's policed differently, so it's a major risk again. I think the regulatory framework needs a little bit of work, but we've been talking about that for years now, and simply nothing's changing. So, if you want to invest in cannabis, you have to be really, yeah, make sure that you partner with the right people. Is the first one. If you're not, if you're not a cannabis community person yourself, and I always say I see a lot of people with no big background in cannabis investing in cannabis, and then people always say like, "Why do you guys do that? Why?" And I'm saying, I see a lot of people who've got no background in chicken, investing in chicken outlets. So that should never be a barrier. It's for me at the end of the day, it's do your research, make sure you partner with the right people, and make sure that you understand that these people have the right sort of supply chain management processes in place. But also if you have the right kind of online uh, driving force behind your business, and we've got a platform now that we've developed. It's called Bud Pilot, and that's if you're an investor, it's going to allow you to, yeah, to monitor stock, for instance, to monitor the movement of stock in your business, in your store. So immediately, if you'll be able to see red flags, etc., as they come in real time. I think that is important for someone who comes out in the cold and understands that, hey, cannabis is the growth numbers simply make sense.
Yeah.
It's a business that I feel that I can invest in. Yeah, there is still a real opportunity to do that. And, it's just do your due diligence and make sure that you partner with the right people.
Beautifully said. So, final question here for you, Eben. Then we've looked at the structural blueprints today. We've looked at the supply chains. We've looked at the branding mechanics. So, for the entrepreneur listening who wants to build a legacy brand in this space, not just a flash in the pan shop, something that pops up today and is gone tomorrow. What would you
Yeah.
say in one or three sentences is the ultimate golden rule of cannabis business strategy? If you had to just put it in one little paragraph, what would you say that golden rule would be?
Don't be greedy. Make sure your story stacks up and build your business from the ground up. Make sure that you are in control end to end of what happens in your business. As soon as what I see cannabis businesses fall apart, as soon as there's leverage within the business on the business owners. And when I say leverage, I'm talking about supply chain issues. I'm talking about quality control. I'm talking about those sorts of things. Make sure that you're on top of those sorts of things yourself. But you know, if you're talking about legacy, make sure your story checks out and that you do it for the right reason.
Okay, beautifully said there. Thank you so much. Brilliant insights today, Eben. Really appreciate you for pulling back the curtain on the actual operational realities of Green Gold, your business, and the wider cannabis business ecosystem. To everybody tuning in, ideas are cheap, execution is everything. So, whether you're building an investment portfolio, a solar asset, or a modern retail dispensary, the rules of business mastery never change. You need a bulletproof structure, an obsessed focus on compliance, and a distinctive value proposition. Stop hustling blindly and rather start building systems. Until next time, I've been the Holistic Hustler, and thank you again to our guest here, Eben. Keep
Thank you.
optimizing. Cheers. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.